Vietnam. It was a strange mixture of peace and war, a battlefield nowhere and a battlefield everywhere. Life during the day, death at night. An ally at one moment, an enemy the next. A lush jungle mixed with the rust of barbed wire. It was all of this. Those who wanted to find the war might have had to hunt for it. Those who didn't want to find the war often became the hunted. And around the world, and particularly the United States of America, there was another battle, a battle of words, of politics and debate. The question was, who was the hunter in Vietnam and who was the hunted? Who would define aggressor and defender? And there was the larger search for a definition of the word peace. Did peace mean only the absence of war, or the absence of war and fear and oppression? This film is a story of the 1960s in two parts, the story of both conflicts, of war and debate. In the 1960s, many Americans did not believe the United States should help South Vietnam, and dissent and demonstrations became, to some, a way of life. But in the beginning of the 1960s, the threat and the prophecy were clear.
I think we faced an extremely serious and intensified struggle with the communists. When we've talked about and read stories of 7,000 to 15,000 guerrillas operating in Vietnam, killing 2,000 civil officers a year, 2,000 police officers a year, 4,000. Now, there's been an election in Vietnam in which 75% of the people or 80% endorsed the government. And yet we read how Vietnam is in danger because of guerrilla operations carried on by this small, well-disciplined, well-supplied across the border group of guerrillas. How we fight that kind of a problem, which is going to be with us all through this decade, seems to me to be one of the great problems now before the United States.
Both the threat and the prophecy were made to a land of many gods. Hardship, poverty, disease, and war had never eroded the faith of the South Vietnamese, their faith in something much higher and larger than themselves. That faith's name to some was Buddha. His name to some was Jesus. His name to some was Confucius and Lao Tzu and Brahma and a myriad of names of ancestors. But in the strange and sometimes strained combinations of gods and faiths in this land, there emerged a commonality. There was a belief that this earth was not all. There was a cause and a reason for being, a cause larger than simply sustaining life. And this force was so powerful, so true, so real, that it was the reason for life itself. The stuff of South Vietnam was neither rice nor jungle, neither the delta nor the mountains. Its heart flowed with undefined faith, and from the undefined came its strength. Too easily, a stranger would say, he's a Buddhist, or he's a Catholic, or he's a Taoist. But the religions were countless and overlapping. The oldest form of Christianity in Vietnam was Roman Catholicism. Since the partition of the Vietnams, hundreds of thousands more Catholics came to the South, where the practice of religion was still free. The country was as mixed as its gods and faiths. The urban lives of Saigon, Hue, Dalat, and Da Nang, Nha Trang, and Vung Tau were full of cluttered patterns. Students and merchants and lovers and shoppers met in the splendor of an Asian disorder. Most of the populace paid no heed to the clamor of the cities and the sounds of horns and hawkers. 90% lived in the uncluttered fields, where they found in the land an uncommon contentment and an orchestration of their life and religion, of their earth and sky, of their work and love. But in Vietnam, the serenity of life and earth and family and prayer had a new intruder. The intruder was not always visible, not always apparent. At times it was difficult to believe he was present in the country at all. But he was. His habits were irregular, his preceding route was unknown. His next steps were never told in advance. But the evidence that he was there was fast becoming a part of every horizon. The intruder changed the horizons of rural South Vietnam and the skylines of urban South Vietnam. As 2 million refugees escaped from the north, not only shrines grew in the south, but hospitals as well. For now there was more than the sick to heal. There were hundreds, then thousands, of wounded.
Let's have another reciter, please.
Civilians told their stories of grenades and shells and rifle shots from men who came to the villages and massacred most of those who lived there. They talked of pillage and fire and atrocities by the Viet Cong and by men who came from the north. The ones who still lived wore deep scars. The memory of a single day would last through their lifetimes, in their minds and on their bodies. These are films of South Vietnam after the destruction of a village by the North Vietnamese. To those in command of North Vietnam and the Viet Cong, the pursuit was a united Vietnam under Hanoi with a communist government. To those in South Vietnam, the pursuit was to be left alone. But they were not left alone. The story was always the same. It became a daily way of life and a daily way of death. Village after village, city after city. Today, dozens killed in one area, hundreds in another, thousands in another. Often mass graves were located months after a massacre. The ones who were previously known only to be missing were found, identified, and buried. In North Vietnam, rallies of victory were held with regularity. Death and destruction in the villages of South Vietnam were hailed as a liberation. The South Vietnamese reacted with missions to search for and destroy the weapons used against them. In the early 1960s, reconnaissance flights began. From the air, the land looked lush and innocent. Signs of an enemy or weapons storage were non-existent. If this lush land held secrets, it was rarely apparent from those in the quick overflights. And so the missions were preserved on film for later study by trained and unhurried eyes. Each flight brought to Saigon a precious cargo of photographs. The evidence was unmistakable. South Vietnam was under threat from external forces. And if it was to stay alive and answer that threat, it would need support.
On the occasion of your New Year's celebration, my fellow Americans and I extend our very best wishes for the prosperity and well-being of the government and the people of Vietnam. In your struggle against aggressive forces of communism, the sacrifices that you have willingly made, the courage you have shown, the burdens you have endured, have been a source of inspiration to people all over the world. Let me assure you of our continued assistance in the development of your capabilities to maintain your freedom and to defeat those who wish to destroy that freedom.
And so the Americans came to Vietnam. Other countries came as well to help the South Vietnamese. Australia, New Zealand, the Republic of Korea, Malaysia, the Republic of China, Thailand, and the Philippines. Just beyond the village were the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese. The civilians of the village were evacuated before the battle that was sure to come. discovered are the prisoners taken by the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong. The battle for today is over. The battle for tomorrow was yet to begin. In the night that separates the two, the enemy would resupply and regroup and replan to take the village once again. The day-by-day price of holding a village was not cheap. In the 1960s, 40,000 Americans were killed in Vietnam, and there were another 1,000 whose fate was not known. And the wives of the missing appealed to the representatives of North Vietnam.
We are very puzzled about why they won't tell us whether or not the men are alive or dead. It seems a very simple thing for them to do. They have told many wives to come back and demonstrate against the United States government. And they implied that we should join the Women's Strike for Peace and that this would be the most helpful thing that we could do to help our men.
Once we educate the general public, not only in this nation but worldwide, to the true facts that these men are in fact not being treated the way Hanoi would like to paint the picture, then I believe public pressure will be brought to bear upon Hanoi, and they will be shown up for the dishonesty and distruth that they are putting forth. We tell the world, we have not heard, we do not know. Please just let us know if our husbands or sons are alive. This is so little to ask.
I've gone to see Senator McGovern since he has been to Paris and has talked with the North Vietnamese. I have written to Secretary General U Thant at the UN, and I have written to Xuan Thuy several times, have not received a reply.
In one of my most recent letters to Senator Fulbright, I said, last summer I wrote to you asking for an appointment with you and expressing the idea that the most vociferous critics of the war had very probably lengthened the war and thus had a detrimental effect on the possibility of release for the prisoners. At that time, you refused to see me on the grounds that my idea was so preposterous, and that was his phrase, that visiting with me would serve no purpose.
We're going back today to Paris in hopes of finding the information that we originally went there seeking. On September 17th, the North Vietnamese promised to send us letters regarding our husbands' status and well-being. We have not to date received those letters. We still want to know about our husbands. We want to know what we can tell our children concerning their fathers.
Well, yes. At the beginning, the real rough treatment came at first when they were trying to get military answers from you, and then after that, they tried to force you into appearing before these delegations to say that you had received humane treatment, and they would throw rocks at you and hit you. And one of the little ones came up and hit me in the side of the mouth, and it dislodged a filling. But and then once I got to the camp, they refused to give me medical treatment, saying that I was going to die in 4 hours if I didn't give them information. I just finally passed out. The North Vietnamese tried to get Lieutenant Commander Stratton to appear before a press delegation and say that he had received humane and lenient treatment. He refused because his treatment hadn't been humane. He had been tied up to ropes, with ropes to such a degree that he still has large scars on his arms from the rope burns which became infected. He was deprived of sleep, beaten, had his fingernails removed, and put in solitary, but the North Vietnamese insisted that he make the false humane treatment statements and threw him into a dark cell alone to think about it for 38 days. I feel a strong obligation to the men back there. They know that I'm going to come back here and tell the truth, and that's what they wanted.
A great free debate, perhaps the greatest of all time, surfaced in the United States, and the country gave birth to 100 voices in universities, in town halls, on television, and in Washington.
I'm opposed to this war not only because I think it is morally and legally wrong, but because I think it is destroying the good name and the leadership of the United States. Furthermore, I believe that the war is militarily unwinnable. If we should succeed in bombing Vietnam to rubble, we will only find ourselves up against the Chinese.
Look, what I could do with is more compassion and more sympathy with those tens of thousands of civilians in South Vietnam who have been killed and kidnapped by the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces as a matter of deliberate policy. And the far larger tens of thousands of South Vietnamese military who've been killed and wounded simply because North Vietnam is trying to seize South Vietnam by force.
I lost a really dear friend over there, and all of a sudden it brought it home to me. And I began wondering, what are we doing over there? Is this what honor is all about? Is it worth it? And I don't think it is.
All of us tend to place a greater value on our own people. But can you really draw a line as to whether it's worth one American life if that, by saving that American life, you subject probably thousands of Vietnamese to death? Human life is human life.
We believe that this war is illegal from every point of view, completely immoral, and I would like to add for myself that it's detrimental to the best interests of the United States.
How do you feel about all the charges that America's immoral and wrong in this war?
I feel they're false because I fought over myself, and I've seen it. Most of the people making these statements haven't been overseas in Vietnam. And if they could go over there and see what's going on, I think they'd think it was just war.
And we just cannot now dishonor our word or abandon our commitment or leave those who believed us and who trusted us to the terror and repression and murder that would follow.
I don't think there's any evidence, any real reason to believe that that kind of mass execution would take place.
The very fact that practically 2 million of the North Vietnamese fled to South Vietnam to escape the communist regime is an indication of that this government did not represent the will of the people.
Not only are we bleeding our men, having them die in Vietnam, we are spending at the rate of about $30 billion a year, $2.5 billion a month in Vietnam. Now that's more than we spend on our entire housing program. It's more than we spend on our entire poverty program in a year. And this money must be diverted back to our domestic needs, and we must end this futile war, immoral war.
The Vietnamese have resisted the invasion of any and all outsiders, the French, the Japanese, and now the Americans. And let me say, as one whose opposition to our policy in Southeast Asia long preceded the rising tide of revolt against it, that there can be no peace by negotiation.
The NLF is part, of course, of South Vietnam, a part that is like an alien body, fed, supplied, supported, and kept up in some state of vigor by a hostile force outside the country, namely in North Vietnam. I wonder how we in this country, or somebody in any other Western European country, would feel if such a force existed within their ranks and somebody from the outside would tell us now, be a good boy and let those people determine your fate.
It started out as a colonial war, it became a civil war, and we intervened on one side
a thing which this country has never done before, and I hope never does again.
Do you feel that what you've gone through and what you're going to have to go through the rest of your life was worthwhile?
Yes, I do. Because I think just about all people should think of just one thing right now, and that's freedom. And the only way we're going to get freedom is to protect ourselves, whether it's in this country or in other countries that need our help. And I think a lot of people feel the same way as I do.
Well, I've said that we ought to publicly indicate our willingness to accept a new government in South Vietnam, which would be a coalition government or a fusion government. I don't really care what they call it. You'd have to anticipate that it would include elements of the National Liberation Front, because this is really what the war has been fought about.
The purpose of communists is to have a coalition government, and from that to dominate the South Vietnam under the communist regime. And our people in South Vietnam don't like it to have a communist.
Well, to those who are flirting with communism, I can only say, have you ever lived under a totalitarian government? Well, I have lived under two types, National Socialistic as well as communism. And I know what I'm talking about. Why don't you ask a Hungarian or a Czech or a Pole or anybody else how they like it before you really ignore the facts of life and support something that you wouldn't want for yourself or for your children?
If we cease bombing, we are, in a sense, not knuckling under, but calling the bluff of other governments who have said that this is the key, and confront them with the responsibility of following through with the imperative logic of their pronouncements in this respect.
Well,
it's a risk for peace.
That might be one element, but I don't hear very many people talk about stopping the invasion of South Vietnam by the North Vietnamese. It seems to me that the two go hand in hand.
There had been 4 or 5 bombing halts. The Soviets had asked us once to halt the bombing for 2 weeks. The suggestion being, the thought being, that they thought negotiations could begin within that period. And the bombing halt lasted for 37 days and was resumed when nothing had started.
I have now ordered that all air, naval, and artillery bombardment of North Vietnam cease as of 8 a.m. Washington time, Friday morning.
This is the kind of peripheral struggle that I think should be compromised. And I don't mean by that we run out and run it. I don't advocate we just say forget it at all. But it isn't of the kind of importance that surely would cause great nations to go to an all-out war.
If you're going to fight a war, I believe in winning it, because you're losing lives. And this is one thing ought to be #1 priority. And whenever you get into a war, my own idea is get everything you can, fast as you can, use everything you can, and get it over with. And I preach this, I'm not saying anything new.
Until the president stands up and says, we're bringing all of the troops home as quickly as we can bring them home, we're bringing them home now, I think the anti-war sentiment in the country will continue to grow. We have to bring them home, and we have to bring them home immediately.
That ending the conflict is not so simple as just calling it off and coming home, because the price for that kind of peace could be 1,000 years of darkness for generations yet unborn.
You don't think there should be a demonstration against the war? Do you think it does any good? It might hurry up the withdrawal?
No, I don't think it will hurry up anything. It might delay it.
Oh, do you have any children?
Yes, I have 3 boys.
Any of them old enough to take part?
One will be 18 next month.
Last spring, Jerry Grossman, a Boston businessman, who was the president of Massachusetts Peace Action Council, suggested that it might be possible to begin to put together an effort across the country to take time away from regular activities and instead devote those days to working against the war.
A lot of Americans are against war, but a lot of them that are against it don't really know everything about it, and they half know about it, and they don't really try to understand. They don't know the Vietnamese people, and they don't know the situation between the South and the North.
That's their objective. It's not peace. They know they are not become stronger, but they believe in you become weaker and weaker.
Most of what you read is made of lies, but speaking what you would, ain't it everybody's thought to wake up in the morning when we rise.
Can you imagine a protester in Hanoi, how far he'd get if he wanted to protest North Vietnam sending troops into South Vietnam or into Laos or Cambodia? He'd end up in a jug.
Have the authorities taken any action against you because of burning your card in Central Park in New York?
None whatsoever.
How do you feel about those who say that you're delaying the war, continuing the war, that prolonging it with this kind of action?
We want the war to stop, and we feel the best way for the war to stop is for the United States to get out of Vietnam.
The moratorium probably militates against the possibility of getting a satisfactory negotiated settlement from Vietnam, from North Vietnam, because it encourages them not to negotiate.
End the war! End the war! End the war! End the war! End the war!
You stupid idiots, you know.
What's your name, sir?
Never mind my name. I'm from Hungary. I'm a freedom fighter. I fought the communists. The bastards. Those idiotic anti-communists. You stupid idiots. I would shoot you all. Like the Russians will shoot you if they come. And half of you have no jobs. You're hanging around the Tudor Street, you demonstrators. You should be out working or do something in the hospitals. It's a disgrace what you are doing here against your own country. I'm ashamed for America, and I'm not an American. I'm a Hungarian.
Who have died in this war.
The many people who died, people die since time immemorial. There's nothing new. People is dying for freedom. People has to die for their children, for their future, for a free America like you here now. You couldn't walk around in Peking because you're misled. Deep inside, I'm sure you're all very, very decent people. And you want the best for humanity. But humanity is finished in the communist countries. You should be not shot, that's too good for you. Do you know what it means having communists go to Hungary, to Czechoslovakia, go to East? Don't laugh so idiotically on the back. Don't run away now. You should listen to that. Stupid idiots. The people here is fighting for freedom. Every coolie here is a hero. Every coolie, every Vietnamese should get a medal, and every American who works so fights here is a hero. You will realize when it's too late.
The debate went on. The demonstrations went on. And every president of the United States during the 1960s had voiced his endorsement of the United States position.
Today, the communists reach ruthlessly for domination over Southeast Asia and are trying to break our will to foil the attempt.
The use which the communists make of democracy, and then when they seize power, the effectiveness with which they manage the police apparatus so that dissent cannot arise, and so that the people can no longer express their will, the liquidation by gunfire of the opposition or by forcing them out of the country to be refugees. This suggests the kind of problem which we're going to have in this decade. And in my judgment, it's an extremely difficult matter for the free nations to deal with. But I must say that it's a matter to which we must address all of our energy and all of our attention.
This nation will keep its commitments from South Vietnam to West Berlin.
Since I took office as president, no single question has occupied so much of my time and energy
as the search for an end to the war in Vietnam. An end fair to the people of South Vietnam, fair to the people of North Vietnam, and fair to those others who would be affected by the outcome. Both in public and at the Paris talks, we've offered a number of proposals which would bring peace and provide self-determination. And we're ready to consider any other proposals that have the same objective. Many urge that if only we halted our bombing of the North, peace would follow. Nearly a year has passed since the bombing of the North was halted. 3 months have passed since we began the process of troop replacement, signaling both our own genuine desire for a settlement and the increased readiness of the South Vietnamese to manage their own defense. As I announced on Tuesday, by December 15th, our troop strength in Vietnam will have been reduced by a minimum of 60,000 men. On September 2nd, 1969, North Vietnam's chief negotiator in Paris said that if the United States committed itself to the principle of totally withdrawing its forces from South Vietnam, and if it withdrew a significant number of troops, Hanoi would take this into account. I repeat here today what I said in my speech of May 14, that we are prepared to withdraw all of our forces from South Vietnam. And the replacement of 60,000 troops is a significant step. The time has come for the other side to respond to these initiatives. The time has come for peace. We in the United States want to end this war, and we are ready to take every reasonable step to achieve that goal. But let there be no question on this one fundamental point. In good conscience, we cannot, in the long-term interests of peace, we will not, accept a settlement that would arbitrarily dictate the political future of South Vietnam and deny to the people of South Vietnam the basic right to determine their own future free of any outside interference.
But the demonstrations and parades continued with a yell of hell no, we won't go. In South Vietnam, there were other parades where cries of hell no, we won't go were non-existent. For without defense, their families and country would live no more. But still the cries went on. Into the closing nights of 1969, candlelight parades marched down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington. The freshly lit torch became one symbol to one group in one land. And it became another symbol to another group in another land.
cháu quân dân Nam một đường cùng tay trai bốn phương về đánh về quê mình nào cùng đi anh em ơi cùng đi xa ba tháng đau buồn lòng con Nam mong chờ tay ta để sức trai to vợ chồng nuôi cho nhân dân an yên vui sống luôn được yên ơi non nước ta mai đây hòa bình đất nước ta mai đây.
The flames were still bright on December the 31st, 1969. Whether that fire would be a permanent light of freedom or would be extinguished was not to be known within the decade. The United States had given lives and treasure and prestige to buy time for the South Vietnamese to face alone what had to be faced. In the last year of the 60s, the troops of the United States were leaving behind trained and equipped South Vietnamese to defend their destiny. For the guns of the North within the South were not silent. Though the decade was done, the struggle of the South Vietnamese to be free was still unfinished.